Joining me today is Judy Karofsky, author of Diselderly Conduct, The Flawed Business of Assisted Living and Hospice. Sexual assault, physical attacks, gross mismanagement, and false promises. These are just a few of the crimes and abuses that Judy Karofsky's elderly mother endured in assisted living facilities after suffering an incapacitating stroke. With Karofsky's help, her mother eventually cycled through 6 facilities in the hope of finding adequate care. Each one turned out to be as dysfunctional as the last. Now, she chronicles her efforts to find appropriate care for her beloved mother in a system that is at best inefficient and at worst inhumane. As she tirelessly advocated for her mother and filled gaps in her care, she saw firsthand ageism, exploitation, poor management, and sometimes outright cruelty. Judy was a city council member and one of Wisconsin's first women mayors. During her term of office, she established a now thriving senior center and emergency medical services. Welcome to the show, Judy.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy to have you here because I think, unfortunately, this problem is getting worse, not better. We have more people over 65 and even younger who require this kind of care. There's less money and there's more of disrupting families. It seems like I have this conversation almost every other day with either a family member or a friend who's going through this with a loved one.
And that's what I came to understand also. In the beginning, this was a series of discussions, and people opened up to me. It's important to say in the beginning that for some people and some families, and we're so happy to hear that and so grateful for their experiences, things do work out better than they did for my mom and me.
Well, should we start with that then? What is it? We want to start with the positive. What is it in there? You're talking about these other families where everything worked out okay.
I can't say because the experiences are so different.
Yeah.
One person said to me, there is a promise to hospice. The secondary theme in the book that I wrote is the hospice program as we know it in America today, and which is actually threatened by the current big beautiful bill. People aren't aware, or as aware as some of us, that if 500 billion is deducted from Medicare, and that's the threat from Medicare reimburses hospice for all of the services that hospice provides. So that's a secondary theme in this book. We should remain aware of the failings of hospice and the hospice organization that my mother was being cared for by. But
I'm going to stop you there because,
yes.
Okay, you're telling me this today or telling our audience.
Yes.
But why doesn't the message get out making that connection? I mean, it's always kind of this big, okay, they're taking monies away from Medicare. Where do the monies go from Medicare?
I was confused myself. Let's say we're all confused. I thought hospice was a charity. I thought it didn't cost anything, and it doesn't to the recipients or to their families. Hospice provides care in terms of visits by nurses, social workers, eventually grief counseling. Hospice provides medical supplies from bandages to wheelchairs. Hospice provides ambulance rides for patients who are on hospice who require medical checkups. All of it is reimbursed through Medicare. So Medicare sets the rules. It's Medicare that decided it was Medicare's rules that allowed the hospice organization to decide when my mother was 99 and a half that she could no longer receive any of those services that I just listed, any of the attention that I just listed. So she was no longer covered by hospice because they were concerned that they would be audited by Medicare, who would say that she had been a recipient for too long. And indeed, by that time, she had been a recipient for 3 years because she outlived the prognostication that she would die within 6 months. Of course, once they removed all of those services and left me, her main caregiver, her sole child, to purchase all of those items I just listed: a wheelchair, bandages, mobility equipment, and to start to provide the rides myself. Within 6 months, my mother did die because that was just a strain on her, if not the fact that she was at that time approaching 100.
Yeah.
So hospice is not what our first impression of it is. It's actually a business and concerned about their source of funding, which is Medicare. And Medicare right now is being threatened in the big, beautiful bill.
Mm.
And the connection between hospice and assisted living is this. Assisted living is, not to repeat, but to repeat, a business. It's a business. It's a real estate play. These facilities are growing throughout the country. There's over 30,000 assisted living facilities at this point. And Kathryn, assisted living is really not a health facility. Assisted living has no federal regulations, none. There's
Okay, so
no
let's define assisted living because different people.
So assisted
Yeah.
living, thank you. Yes, assisted living is a home really where people who do not need yet, or thankfully, full-time nursing services, round-the-clock nursing services, which are provided in nursing homes, a different type facility. Assisted living is the kind of home where people can receive some services with their ADRs, activities of daily life. They can have help with going to the bathroom, ambulating, walking, with some activities, with meals for sure. Meds are given to them in assisted living. Assisted living was started in the 1980s, and it was started in Oregon by a person who was an inspiration to me, whose name is Karen Brown Wilson. Her mother had had a stroke, and her mother was institutionalized, basically. She was sent to what we knew then for care, a nursing home, a ward. Everything was done for her on schedule. And at 55 years of age, she turned to her daughter and said, "Get me out of here." So Karen Brown Wilson, who was a gerontologist, and her husband, who also happened to be a gerontologist, I think he was a faculty member, she was a graduate student, they came up with the concept of a home where people who needed some care, but not round-the-clock care, could move to and have just exactly the services they needed and nothing else. One little quip said that they could have M&Ms in their rooms if they wanted.
Yeah.
They could paint their rooms. They could have pets in their rooms. Karen Brown Wilson opened another facility and another one and another one. And by the time she left the business, she had facilities in 18 states. She had 3,000 employees. But she came to realize that she was not providing what she had set out to provide. Because as the business grew, and there were investors, and I'm presuming board meetings and decisions about cost containment, she did say that at some point, the service provision meant more than the patient. And
I'm going to ask you, Judy, what about, you just said there are 30,000 assisted living communities.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, can we start sort of comparing them, or can one compare them to, let's say, hotels? You have the very worst and the very best, and the stuff in the middle.
A hotel is a brilliant comparison because in the beginning, it is true that Holiday Inn converted some hotels or their facilities into assisted living facility. That's just brilliant because that is the point. And assisted living is very pretty, very attractive, lovely landscaping, lovely lobby. They are marketed to decision makers, the next generation, who is deciding where and how for the most part, their parents, loved ones will move to and be cared for. There's really no complete definition of assisted living. There's no federal definition because there's no federal regulations over assisted living. We do not have that, no oversight. In January of 2024, there was a Senate Committee on Aging hearing. Present at that meeting was an Ohio senator named J.D. Vance and Liz Warren, Massachusetts Senator Liz Warren. But nothing happened after that because that was January 24. Although they were meeting to discuss the industry and potentially to discuss oversight or regulations, we know what's happened in the last year and a half, the election, the campaign, and then the election, and then the very different administration with very different views. There are state regs. States do regulate assisted living facilities. And if you are asking me, how do we find out about a ranking of these facilities? We don't know. We do know for nursing homes. I have seen those. I think nursing homes have a 5-star rating system. So, and that's assigned by the federal government agency, probably the Agency on Aging and Medicare. And so you can find out if it's a 5-star or a 4-star or a 3-star. And I have no idea what those assignations mean. But for assisted living, there is nothing. I read yesterday that the state of Maryland, one state, has now begun to inspect and require that their assisted living facilities meet certain standards. I couldn't find out what those standards were, but ostensibly they're for safe and health and health related issues. And the state of Maryland it must have been a press release if I read it yesterday. They're proud of the fact that they've now inspected 50%, only 50% of the assisted living facilities in the state. And again, I'm not sure what they were looking for except health and safety issues.
Yeah, I think you touched on also another thing that I've noticed, that a friend who was looking at facilities for their father, that some of the facilities look great. They look like the kind of quote hotel you'd want to stay at, and very appealing to the loved ones. But when it came to the actual care of the person, it's not there. And some of the and true of places that perhaps don't look as glamorous, but do provide better care for the patient.
So how do you know?
Yeah,
That's
how do you know?
How do you know? And there's a chapter in my book, Diselderly Conduct, The Flawed Business of Assisted Living and Hospice. There's a chapter called Bait and Switch. And in that chapter, I go through the advertising, the marketing that is done by these assisted living facilities. And they all sound or look the same. People are on bikes. People are having birthday parties. Well, they do have birthday parties. People are having barbecues. They're outdoors. And so the marketing is targeted to the decision makers. And I say a couple of times in the book, it's really ageist to claim that the people who are aging are looking for that kind of activity. They're not looking for bikes. They're not looking for outdoor
Pelotons.
They're not looking for Pelotons, and there are Pelotons. There's exercise equipment in all of these facilities, but it's not used.
Yeah.
And the games and the puzzles, I guess puzzles are ubiquitous and are played. But that's bait and switch. That's illegal in business. You can't claim that you're going to have a pool and you don't have a pool when people get there. One head nurse at one facility, as my mom and I were leaving, and I looked at her and said, how come you have this list of activities, from games to celebrations to a 4th of July discussion to making poetry? My mother actually loved it. If they ever would start to put a poem together, she'd love to add the words and the lines. And she looked at me and she said, oh, that just comes from our home office. In other words, it was never the intention of that facility to offer or to carry out the activities that were listed and posted on a whiteboard, which was there for visitors from the state, should they ever have appeared, and for decision makers who were trying to decide if their parents could or should be housed there.
What about cost? Let's talk about cost.
Cost It's amorphous. I mean, it can go from 5,000, I believe. I'm not in that business any longer. My
Yeah.
mother, unfortunately, hasn't been with me, and I haven't paid one of those bills in several years. But I understand now, from 5 to maybe 20. But sometimes it's just really difficult to receive a cost estimate upon entry. Each facility defines the costs differently. It might be just the quote rent. It might be the rent plus certain activities. And let's examine your mom before she comes in so we can tell how many people will be needed to transfer her between wheelchair and toilet or wheelchair and dining room seat. And based on that, whether it's a quote 1-person transfer or a 2-person transfer, the rates will go up. What I did find, and this does tie the two sub themes of my book together, is that once hospice is aboard, once a patient is determined, that's loosely defined, determined to be within 6 months of death, that hospice can be brought to the assisted living facility. This, Kathryn, is a slightly different model from hospice visiting homes or hospice facilities, bricks and mortar facilities, where some people do go for their last weeks or days. But when hospice comes to an assisted living, and it's quite common, I was aware immediately that we didn't receive any lower charges, no lower rents, but now hospice was doing any and all of the quote nursing that was being done for my mom, and in fact showering her and taking care of her on a weekly basis, sometimes more than once a week. But there was no discount for us because of the hospice involvement. So there's this very interesting tie, I think, an economic tie between assisted living facilities and hospice, and especially if that assisted living facility encourages you, as they did to me, to bring hospice on board.
Yeah.
The first time hospice came to visit, and it was a marketing team with their clipboards and brochures, once I heard, which we all know, but it was being said to me, that my mom's meds would be cut back, that she wouldn't be having any physical therapy sessions, but she had recently broken a hip and she was still receiving physical therapy. I said, I don't think so. This is not for us. And in my mother's health records, in her health records, someone wrote, that the nurse of that facility said, well, Judy doesn't always make the best decisions for her mother. So the pressure was on to invite hospice, allow hospice to enter my mother's care. And in fact, within a few months, those physical therapy sessions were no longer allowed because she'd run through her allotted sessions. And so hospice did come aboard. And from that time until my mom's death, hospice played a very important role in my mother's care.
So, Judy, how can we prepare for all of this, or can we?
Can we?
Yeah.
Yeah. What you said in the beginning, before we even had spoken to each other, is so important. We need to be talking about this. We do. And that's really what I was doing for a long period of time until I realized I was writing a book. I had so many notes, and they started to fall into so many distinct categories that I could start to put it together into what everybody says, you should be writing a book. And lo and behold, I was. Those discussions are so important. They hold up people who are going through trying times. I dedicate this book to over 700 people who graduated from my college who are on a private Facebook page. And that Facebook page meant so much to me while I was going through the difficulties with my mom, who was aging and in fact dying. And I still belong and I still share in the try to answer, or not to exactly give advice, but to share in the problems that I hear or read on that page. But after a while, I realized, now direct answer to your question, the most important thing we can do is get to policymakers. policymakers, the people who have the ability and the responsibility to make some changes here, to do what I guess the state of Maryland is doing, to start to investigate these facilities, to see what kind of health and care um, um, criteria are not being met in individual facilities.
Yeah, so they're and different from state to state, you're saying.
It's different
Yeah.
from state to state. And I am in Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, it's quite slim. They in Wisconsin, and this might be the case in all states, in assisted living, a resident, a quote, patient, is entitled to a maximum of 3 hours of care a week. That's it. So it's not really a health facility. So, and sometimes there aren't even nurses on board. My mother was in two different situations where there were no nurse. One had recently been fired and they didn't replace her, and in another one, it was an itinerant nurse who visited every 2 weeks. So, to start to have some stricter rules to focus on that health word, to focus on care instead of the pretty lobbies and bicycle rides. To be consistent, because I think that's what you might have been saying to me, that sometimes a facility that doesn't look so pretty, that doesn't have the pretty landscaping, although landscaping was truly one of my mother's greatest joys. She really needed and wanted to see the flowers around her facilities, but it doesn't have the attractive amenities. Sometimes that might be a facility that will provide better care. And here's where we are right now. Here's the magic word, the awful word, really, staffing. Staffing. How do we know how long the staff has been there, will continue to be there, how well trained they are? We can assume that they probably are not well trained, well paid, well organized, or well represented. So we can work on that issue alone. And are you tired yet? Here's another one. As these facilities have grown and proliferated, and probably what Karen Brown Wilson was becoming aware of, although I've never had a discussion with her, what has happened is outside investors have come into the business. It is a business. It's a real estate play. Outside investment means private equity, REITs, real estate investment trusts. This means remote management, remote decision-making, and less patient-oriented care.
So you're talking about corporate investments, that kind of stuff?
That kind of stuff, which after that hearing that I referred to in January of 2024, after the hearing in the lobby of the Senate, Senator Liz Warren said, we have to do something before private equity has bought up every one of these facilities, because the profit possibility is there. This is a market that doesn't have to do market studies. You said that in the beginning. The population is aging, it's growing. The demographics is a gift to this business. There will always continue to be older and older people because the baby boomers are now of age and their children are making decisions for them.
And also at the same time, money is being poured into pharmaceuticals to keep us alive. So
That's right.
One group trying to keep everybody alive till they're 100.
Yes.
And the other, yeah. So,
yes. Fortunately, I mean that's
we're
living
great,
longer, and we're living healthy longer. So good. So there's the market. They don't. I kid. I think when I say they do not have to do market studies, but it's kind of like build it and they will come. So this is, and once they come, the result is truly profiteering on the part of the owners and the organizations. And it does not make any difference. People have asked me this, if the facilities are, quote, for profit or nonprofit. Because even in those nonprofit facilities, some people at the top, the CEO, CFOs, whatever O's, are making comparable salaries to those who are managing assisted living similar facilities that are for profit because they are professionals in the field, professional healthcare facility managers. And you just said the meds are costing, the care costs, they're all facing the same costs.
We only have a couple minutes left, and this conversation could go on and should, and we all need to continue the conversation and read your book. And I do,
Thank you.
there's just one other comment, though. I think another reason why we're emotionally maybe ill prepared to, I'm going to say, attack the problem, is because in the very beginning, when your loved one starts maybe not being able to take care of themselves or showing signs of dementia, we tend to hide and pretend, and we're ashamed to talk about it until things get into a crisis mode. And then we begin to act or react to the
Once
situation.
again, you've pinpointed it. The decisions to move to assisted living are crisis driven.
Yeah. All right, everyone, you need to get out and read Judy's book, Judy Karofsky. Okay, Judy, tell us, book where we can find out.
The book is actually available wherever you buy books. There's even a Kindle version. If you access my website, which is www.diselderlyconduct.com. You have to be careful how you spell that, diselderlyconduct.com. There are hints where you can buy the book, but it is and should be available everywhere. Kathryn, thank you so much for bringing this issue to your listeners this morning.
Well, thank you so much for writing this book, because it is really, I'm going to say, it's cutting edge. People really do need to read it. I mean, and you've covered to me, it seems like you've covered all the issues. Now we have to act, or as I said, react.
It's a call to action. It truly is.
Yeah, call to, excuse me, a call to action. Let's not wait for more crises. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joining me today is James T. Hamilton, author of You Got In, Now What? 100 Insights into Finding Your Best Life in College. Once you've been admitted to college, the next step is to develop a strategy of how to find your best life there. Some avoid challenging experiences, follow a path of familiar expectations, and rely on shortcuts. Others aim for perfection, ignore their friends and health, labor over what subjects to study, and neglect spending time outside the classroom. The pressure to make college valuable and interesting can feel overwhelming. James T. Hamilton shares important lessons to help you find purpose, manage time, maintain friendships and family relationships, stay physically and mentally healthy, and choose classes, majors, and careers. He is vice provost for undergraduate education and Hearst Professor of Communication at Stanford University. The winner of 8 teaching awards at Harvard, Duke, and Stanford, he spent decades teaching and mentoring undergraduates and designing programs to help them thrive in college. Welcome to the show, James. Nice to have you on.
It's great to be here.
So I think as I was thinking about doing this interview with you, one of the things that I see with college students, and I'm involved with several colleges, the students appear to be they may be intellectually independent, but emotionally they're very immature. They think they're very mature, very sophisticated, but it seems to me they are less mature than, let's say, previous generations. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. So we can talk about some of those too.
Yes, I think part of it is living life online. These are digital natives, and if you think about the hours that you might spend on social media, there's an opportunity cost to that. You haven't been interacting with someone in person, and you miss out on real life conversations, and you miss out on that opportunity to take a risk to talk to somebody who's different than you are in person.
So you're saying they come to college, Ivy League schools, Stanford. Those are all the kinds of connections you have, and still these kids come in and they just don't seem to be able to take risks, get out, emotional risks, connecting with other people, connecting with new kinds of experiences. Um, and you're in the throes of it. So how do you sort of get them out of that mindset?
One thing is in the college admissions process, we ask people to take a snapshot of themselves, to tell us what they're interested in, to tell us what they're excited about, what they hope to do. But when they get here, what we want them to do is re-examine all of those things. And I think early on, what we want to have people realize is that you shouldn't live another person's script. You shouldn't live out your college life based on expectations that other people have about you. You're really going to be the author of your own life story. And the way to get the most out of the college experience is to be open to new ideas and to new people and new experiences. And that's hard in a risk-averse world.
Also, and I think you mentioned this, and they've been working, most of the students, especially at some of the schools that we've been talking about, uh, to create a resume to do, you do this, this, and this, and you're going to be able to get into Stanford if you do this and this for the 4 years. And then they have to get out of, once they get in, then, okay, I don't have to do that anymore, right? There are a lot more options, and being able to kind of bridge that, um, I don't know, it's not really a gap, but sort of that transition to be able to kind of stop doing what they were doing and be able to see that they can be more creative and that they do have a lot more options.
That's the hope, to realize that they have a lot more freedom than they might expect. But once students are in college now, especially given the uncertainty around the job markets, they will sometimes start all over and think about their career right away. And in their first couple of semesters or quarters, they'll already be asking themselves, what's my major? Because that's going to set me up for a career. And that's actually not true. Choosing your major is not choosing your career. Only about a quarter of people who work in jobs that are directly related to their major, according to a study by the Federal Reserve. And when you ask employers, more than 90% of them will say what's important to them is your ability to think critically and communicate clearly and solve complex problems rather than what your major is. But what you find when students arrive is they're already very focused on what the next step is. And the way I view that is sometimes they look at college as a degree rather than as an education, as a signal about their productivity, rather than a unique opportunity for self-testing and self-transformation.
Well, if students they're in school for 4 years, and things change so quickly, and jobs expectations for what jobs are available also change, or the reality of what jobs are available. I keep reading that changes every 6 months. Uh, what they decide to do as a freshman, by the time they graduate, that job might not even exist anymore, and there are new jobs because of because of AI, because of all of the tech stuff that's happening. So that would seem to me have an impact on how what they do in their college 4 years.
That's right. And in fact, at Stanford, in the first quarter, we have a class that two-thirds of the entire class takes called Why College? And it's really meant to have people reflect on what the nature of a liberal arts education is. And when you think about a modern liberal arts education, it really has seven goals. One is the degree. That's a signal that you got in and you got out. One is networking. Those are the friendships you make, the mentorship relationships you have with faculty. One is domain specific knowledge. So my PhD is in economics, and I learned an economic lens that helps me understand how the world works. And then there's critical thinking skills, the ability to spot a problem, gather information, develop hypotheses, test those ideas. And the market rewards all of those things really well, the signal, your network, your domain-specific knowledge, and your ability to think critically. But the reason why universities like Stanford are nonprofits are the three other goals. One is moral self-development and self-knowledge, asking yourself, what's the nature of the good life? One is citizenship. All our students are going to graduate and join communities and decide whether they're going to get involved in working on the provision of public goods and community issues. And then the last goal, one of my favorites, is just intrinsic love of learning, puzzles that are fun to solve. And we often call that also basic research. And today's basic research is tomorrow's applied research. But I think those seven goals are a great way for students to think about what they should really be trying to do with their education. And if you focus on those goals, I think it'll help you regardless of what the job market is on the day you graduate.
But have you seen those things changing? I mean, it seems to me from maybe even every 10 years, I was going to say from generation to generation. It seems to me, for instance, you're talking about community involvement, being engaged in the communities. Is that eroding? Because you mentioned earlier, people are online, the connections are different, they're not in person, they're virtual. How's that affected students' ability to jump into a community and, develop the character that they need to be able to do that, to make good connections? Seems to me that, well, I'm asking you the question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's interesting across those seven goals, the degree that students care about them really has changed over time. So if you go back to the 1960s into the early 1970s, the predominant goal that Frosh reported in coming to college was to figure out how they should live their lives, what the nature of a good life is. And then starting into the 1970s and going forward, it gradually became a focus on career. I'd say over the last 10 to 15 years, universities have tried to emphasize the civic nature of your education. We have classes on, for instance, service learning, where you engage with community partners in a class that really tries to build something or work on a particular project in the community. I think if you define community action really broadly, working as a volunteer, tutoring people in elementary schools like our students do at the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford. Um, that's still pretty robust. But I will have to say one thing to look for in the future is what a pathway into public service looks like now in a world where some of the agencies, some of the jobs that students were aiming for have been reduced at the federal level, not the state level, but at the federal level.
What about and what about and this is a slightly a different topic, obviously, but what about the impact of this of parenting when these kids come into the connecting to parents constantly, not being able to separate? The parents are so engaged, or some parents, many parents, so engaged or involved in their students' choices, activities, options, and it's obviously very easy to do that because you're online. How has that impacted students and the choices they made?
That's a really interesting phenomenon. Depending on what coast you're on, they're called helicopter parents or snowplow parents, people who are trying to ease the way for their children, understandably. Um, that really runs up against this idea of becoming an adult. And by that, I mean there's a great psychology professor at Stanford, Carol Dweck, who's coined this term, the growth mindset. And the idea is suppose your child faces a challenge. Um, if you encourage a growth mindset, you help people see challenges as opportunities to stretch, as really opportunities to grow, sort of like working out as a muscle tears and gets stronger. Unfortunately, there's an opposite approach, which views a challenge as a referendum on your intelligence and how smart you are. And parents can reinforce that second negative approach by constantly praising their kids for being smart rather than for putting out effort and trying to take on challenges. So you're exactly right that well-meaning parents may believe that they are looking out for their children's best interest. But one of the things about being an adult is learning how to deal with setbacks on your own rather than having someone else smooth the way for you.
Yeah, I think that's critical, but it seems an almost impossible because here, I mean, when I was in college and grad school, if you had a problem and you called your parents once a week, that was or they called you. But today you have your cell phone, and it's just very easy to say, call your parent. You've got whatever you're dealing with, some issue, and it's an easy connection, and it's not actually going to go away. So I guess how do you sort of navigate that ability to do that and still maintain your, as you're saying, your emotional and your intellectual independence?
Well, one of the things, I think there are two things there. One is encouraging students to realize that they should expect setbacks. One of what I have said to students, and I said this on Admitted Student Weekend, that if you look at people who've gone to Stanford before, I'm thinking of a student who got a D in genetics and a C in first year writing or a C on their first essay in college. And those people went on to be a future US Senator, a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and a National Book Award winner. I try to get them to see that where they start in college is not where they're going to end up, and that learning actually starts when you see what you don't know. So that's a strategy. One other thing that you've pointed out with the connections, the cell phones. I've banned electronics in my classes since 2000. And no laptops, no cell phones. People take notes on paper. I use a Blackboard, and that works for the economic classes about media markets that I teach. But I think it is important to have tech-free moments in your life where you set aside the distractions. People think that they can multitask, that they can listen to a professor and look at social media, but the research shows it's not the case. You get out of it less if you're not fully present.
Yeah. Those are, I like that, especially expectations, I guess was the first one. Expect that you're not going to do well, that you're going to get a C or a D. That's okay. But what are you then going to do about it? And um, that has a lot to do with it, because also coming from high school, you're expected, especially if you're going to Stanford, you're expected to get the A's, to be the best athlete, to whatever it is you're doing. So expectations have to change, and a tech-free environment. You must have quite a reputation, actually. I was thinking, like, I mean, you have to take notes. You can't have your laptop. Oh my, it'd be really interesting just to take your course for all of that. Yeah.
It's funny, the students in the evaluations afterwards say, I actually didn't expect I would enjoy this, but I did. But
Yeah.
I got more out of it because I was able to focus. It's interesting you mentioned resumes. There's a Stanford professor, Tina Seelig, who actually has her students keep a failure resume just for themselves, where they write down things that didn't go wrong, and then they have to derive the lessons that they learned, just like in a normal resume where you're telling somebody, I did this and it was a success, and here's how I got stronger. She flips it, and it's something that they don't show to somebody else, but it is a good, almost like a personal accounting tool.
That is a great idea. And I think you shouldn't save that until college, until you do get into Stanford. Do that in high school. Start when you're a freshman in high school. That's a great exercise.
It really is. I mean, she does that with her students. She also, I love this, on the first day of class says, never miss an opportunity to be fabulous. And the reframing of this isn't just a class that has homework. This is a class where you're going to get the opportunity to excel. That actually causes her students to put out more, be creative, because she's invited them to do that.
What about you? What would you say in your college experience? I don't know where did you graduate from? Not that that necessarily.
I was an econ and gov major at Harvard, and then I got a PhD in economics from there.
Okay. So you were at Harvard. Now, your college experience, what, any regrets you personally had, or some kind of a wow, I guess I would say, reflection on what you did right, or what you felt was important to you, that you learned a positive experience.
Sure. I had at least two takeaways that I still share in office hours with students about my undergrad education. One is I really fell in love with the novels of a Southern writer named Walker Percy. And he had a line in one of his books, which is, it's possible to get all A's and flunk life. And that phrase really stuck with me, this idea that you have an academic life, but you also have a life of family and friends. And you need to focus on that second a lot. And the other takeaway I had from my undergraduate days that I share with students is no existential thoughts during exam period. And what I would often see is that the pressure of studying would often cause people to think, why am I doing this? What is this all for? And the week of your exams is not the week that you should set out fundamentally your life story. So I always say, put that aside for exam week. Realize that that question is going to come up, but it's not going to be on your exam. And you should probably set it aside for that week.
Well, I do remember because my dad graduated from Harvard Law School, and this was one of the similar to what you're saying. I mean, maybe they used to say, the C students uh, don't necessarily become the best lawyer. The A students don't necessarily become the best lawyers. It's the C students that become the best lawyers. Maybe he was talking about himself, but uh, that and yeah, which is kind of similar to what you're saying, I think.
Yes, yes. And it's also one other thing, you mentioned law school. One of the lessons in the book came from Senator Cory Booker. He was at law school, wasn't sure what his next step was, and his mother asked him a question. She said, "What would you do if you could not fail? If you knew that you were going to succeed, what would you really want to succeed at?" And that really led him into a life of politics, which is more uncertain than other pathways. There's no HR department for the public interest that says, here's exactly what you need to do. But I loved how that question, what would you do if you could not read him up?
Then you really do need, I mean, that was his mother. But if you're talking about your parents, your teachers, I mean, it's really important for those people to ask you the right questions to help you to think about it, to think about what we've been taught, to think about actually what your book is about, right? Like, it's really critical for those people to be there and to guide you in the kinds of ways that you've been talking about.
I agree. And again, going back to electronics, email has killed office hours. Students will email you a question about a particular assignment, and you'll give them an answer, but you can't at the end of the answer say, what are you doing this summer? That sounds creepy. But if they come to you in office hours, you can have a great discussion and also mentor at the same time. So when I have friends whose children go off to college and they say, one piece of advice, what is it? It's always go to office hours. People really want to talk to you.
Yeah, when you say it's cut up, and there are what are actually you say, I mean, office hours were hard to, when I was in school, to get an appointment with the teacher because they were so busy, or the professor, right? So now, like, how often do professors see their students? I mean, in real
Most
numbers, like, yeah.
Yeah, most professors have office hours each week at stated times, an hour, hour and a half. And if you're a professor, you always have other work that you should do or could do because students don't show up. When I first started teaching in the 1990s, there was always a line outside my door. Now, I'm lucky if one or two students will come over the course of that hour or 90 minutes.
So you're begging them to come in. Let's talk.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Which is critical. We only have a couple minutes left, so we want people to get out there and read the book, obviously. And the title, I've been talking to the author, James Hamilton, and the author he is the author of You Got In, Now What? 100 Insights into Finding Your Best Life in College. So, where can we find out where we can get the book and more information about you and what you're doing in your work?
Sure. I think an online bookseller like Amazon is the easiest way to find it. It's also at local bookstores. And finding out more about my work, just Google me, James T. Hamilton, Stanford, and you'll find more about my work, especially focused on trying to help students get a modern liberal arts education.
Terrific. Thanks for being on the show today. I mean, lots of really good information, and we appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.